Good morning. My name is Dionysus. I lived in Athens in the 1st century. And I want to tell you my story. The story that changed my life. I was given a day pass from heaven to come and share with you. I said to Pete, Pete, Grace Chapel is talking about the book of Acts. I got to go. So he gave me a day pass. I'm very grateful for that. I was appointed a member of the Areopagus court in Athens in the middle of the century. We didn't have much power in those days under Rome, but we were still a free city. We were still the empire's intellectual metropolis, standing on the shoulders of the likes of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And the court, our court, was the Athenian governing council, overseeing trial cases in civil matters, religious matters, and yes, homicide. We were well known for famous homicide murders throughout the ages. I was well educated, steeped in Greek mythology and philosophy. I was a typical Athenian, loved to discuss life and philosophy. The city was not actually very large, but it was full of gods and goddesses worshipped in the many temples and shrines. You know, it was said that it was easier to find a god than a man in Athens. But I found these gods more of a distraction than a reality in my life. They were so distant from us and didn't really care about us. And so we're on our own. We're trying to figure out life. Do you know, in the Constitution of the Areopagus, there was actually written that there was certainly no life after death. Now, Plato, he argued for an immortal soul, but we refuse to acknowledge it or accept it. This life is it. So how do we make the best of it? You know, there's a quote from Plato that sort of gets at my inner being. I cannot get it out of my head. Around 500 years before Christ, Plato was asked, what are the behaviors of people that surprise you the most? We're going to put it up on the screen because this is what he wrote. Plato replied, he said, they get bored in childhood and hurry to grow up, but then they miss their childhood. They lose their health to earn money, but then they pay money to regain their health. They're worried about tomorrow, but they forget about today. In the end, they live neither today nor tomorrow. They live as if they will never die, and they die as if they have never lived. These words remind me that I must do better than that. Life has to have some meaning, and as a member of the court, we legislate what's right and wrong. But how do we live out our day-to-day existence? We have Epicureans and Stoics on our bench. Now, the Epicureans, they seek happiness. They're logical people. They want to learn to be content. Don't do any harm to anybody. Seek happiness. You know what? They even had a happy school. Now, the Stoics, they're different. they're more realistic about life. It's hard. So discipline yourselves to overcome adversity and suffering. Push yourselves physically and mentally. And God, well, He's everywhere. God and the universe, they're all the same. So the Epicureans, they say, enjoy life. And the Stoics, they say, endure life. I first saw him in the marketplace, in the agora. He was rather small in stature. He looked very Jewish. And he was bold. I mean, fearless. Talking about a way to live that we'd never heard before. His name was Paul of Tarsus. He seemed to be just on his own. Obviously well educated from that university city. He understood us. I don't think I've ever heard anyone so passionate before. He had a certain authority and aura about him. He was able, on the one hand, to not be afraid to challenge how we live and how we view gods. And yet there was a strange compassion in his voice. He really cared about us. I could see that. Now, some called this preacher a babbler, but I thought he was fascinating. And for one, I wanted to hear more. And I was so glad that he was invited to come to the Areopagus to speak more about this new way of living. He wasn't being arrested. He was invited to speak. Now, I brought a picture with me of what it probably looked like in those days. And you can see how magnificent it all is, with the Pantheon Temple in the background. Now, a précis of his speech was written down and recorded later by Luke, who would have had a first-hand interview with Paul. And I'm going to read it to you. So Paul took his stand in the open space at the Areopagus and laid it out for them. It is plain to see that you Athenians take your religion seriously. When I arrived here the other day, I was fascinated with all the shrines I came across. And then I found one inscription: to the God nobody knows. I'm here to introduce you to this God so you can worship intelligently. Know who you're dealing with. The God who made the world and everything in it, this master of sky and land, he doesn't live in custom-made shrines or need the human race to run errands for him as if he couldn't take care of himself. He makes the creatures. The creatures don't make him. Starting from scratch, he made the entire human race, and he made the earth hospitable with plenty of time and space for living, so we could seek after God and not just grope around in the dark, but actually find him. He doesn't play hide and seek with us. He's not remote. He's near. And we live and move in him. Can't get away from him. One of your poets said it well: we're the God created. Well, if we are the God created, it doesn't make a lot of sense to think we could hire a sculpture to chisel a God out of stone for us, does it? God overlooks as long as you don't know any better. But that time is past. The unknown is now known. And he's calling for a radical life change. The unknown is known. And he's calling for radical life change. He has set a day when the entire human race will be judged and everything will be put right. And he has already appointed the judge, confirming him before everyone by raising him from the dead. As I listened to that, it was amazing. You know, it's true. We have this statue to the unknown God. It's typical Greek thinking, you know, just in case we miss the God. It's like an insurance policy. And I'm open to hear about a new God, a new idea. But some here, they're not open at all. They say, you know, if God exists, well, they don't care about us anyway, so what's one more? Who wants a God meddling with their life after all? That's what they would say. But you know what? I'm open. I'm open. Because to be honest, I'm restless. I hope there's more to life. I suppose I would be called an open agnostic. You know, I just don't want to fulfill Plato's observation and die as if I never lived. Paul presents a God who is the creator of all things, and only a God who is so near, completely independent from humans. And he's describing a different kind of God-human relationship. As the God creator, he's calling us to a radical life change. No more groping in the dark, he says. But there's purpose to life. Life is going somewhere. Paul says everything will eventually be put to right. This God has a plan. History is moving forward, and we're a part of it, and we'll be judged. Now, light bulbs are going off. We didn't have electricity in those days, but light bulbs were going off. Not that, you know, I'm not sure what it would be like, light bulbs, but anyway, you know what I mean. Light bulbs going off in my head. What we do actually matters. And then something completely foreign to our ears, the one who will judge all things, lived, died, and then rose from the dead. Now, I know this judge is called Jesus because Paul was speaking about him in the marketplace. And Paul is a witness to this risen Jesus. Now, I'm a judge. I know an honorable witness when I hear it. I see so much injustice, so many false witnesses coming and testifying. And we know that they are false. But I am telling you, this man is not false. I want justice to reign so much. Do you know, as he spoke, it's like finding the missing puzzle piece that completes the story. Or it's like a difficult piece of music that I couldn't play, and Paul has shown me how to play it in perfect harmony. Of course we can't make gods out of our own imagination. There must be evidence of a true God and beauty, and the beauty and complexity of creation and the resurrection offer exactly that. You know what's amazing? Paul wasn't supposed to be in Athens. He was driven out of Thessalonica and Berea and escaped to Athens to wait for his friends. The God who created all things sent someone to tell me, about the God who created all things. And anyone else who would listen. In this city that for hundreds of years has pursued truth. And now I can discover the unknown God revealed through Jesus. Then I read the response in Paul's address. I'll put that up on the screen, see? At the phrase, raising him from the dead, the listeners split. Some laughed at him and walked off making jokes. Others said, oh, let's do this again. We want to hear more. But that was it for the day. Paul left. There were others, it turned out, who were convinced then and there and stuck with Paul. Among them, Dionysus, the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris. That's me. I'm in the Bible. I was able to hang out with Paul for a number of days and discover real living with Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And it's a story I must tell, and it's a story I must live out. Some say I traveled Europe proclaiming faith, that I eventually became Bishop of Athens and was martyred there. Maybe, maybe not. I'm going to leave that mystery for another time. Well, my time is up. Thanks for listening to my story. Now, this is the difficult part. Thank you. So we've been hearing in this series, in Acts, the challenge every week that we hear the gospel of Jesus Christ proclaimed. And we hear the call to continue the journey that the first century church started. We, you, me, we are to live out our faith. It's not a theory. It's a reality that we are to experience. The Holy Spirit filling us, directing our paths, using us to bring hope, justice, forgiveness, generosity into the culture around us and sharing the story, just like Dionysus. And we do this in community, belonging to a local church, and we do this individually as we go through the ordinary days, and in the ordinary, extraordinary things can happen. Now, the Apostle Paul, he was an evangelist. He could speak to large crowds. Most of us, we don't have that gift. However, just as he was moved by the Holy Spirit to share the good news, to go here, to go there, we are called to be available as well and ready to come alongside people in the ordinary to make a difference and share our faith. And in the twists and turns of life, the sudden diversions, we're not to waver because our circumstances have changed. We're to be a consistent witness where change brings new opportunities, even if that new road is very difficult. And perhaps you are experiencing that right now. A change in circumstances, a new road you did not expect or want, or perhaps a new road that is welcome. Whatever the change, we do not waver in who we are and how we live out our faith. These two scriptures I'm going to bring up, they're a poignant reminder. The first is in Romans 1:16. I'm going to take a little drink of water here. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, or of the gospel. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It is the power of God for the salvation of everyone who believes. And then in 1 Peter, we read, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Now, we live in a culture where spirituality is deemed personal and private. We live in a culture that judges the church as irrelevant. Many have been hurt by the church. So like the Epicureans, people are striving to enjoy life with the endless pursuit of whatever, with the inevitability that it does not bring fulfillment. Or they're like the Stoics, enduring life, trying to be a good person through it all, which is so hard and exhausting. We live in a worldview that offers you nothing but self-help books and podcasts, false gods and idols, and it's hard to discuss faith. But within these obstacles and tensions, people still crave community. They're made in God's image. Relationships are important because we have been created for relationships. Our God is one of relationships. And if they could just block out that very loud noise of the culture, they may acknowledge that there is something more to life. They just can't put their finger on it, and they're either burying this longing, suppressing it, or they're trying to find it in all the wrong places. And as we engage with those we come into contact with, we do, as we read, with gentleness and respect. People are not projects. You know, we don't fire the gospel at people, because they're a project. And we don't assault people with the gospel to win an argument and possibly lose the soul. We dance with people. We actually dance with people. When you dance with someone, you ask them if they would like to dance. And if they want to dance, then that's great, you dance. If they don't want to dance, then that's fine. But when they do dance, we come alongside them with empathy and care of who they are. It's authentic caring. We pray they accept a conversation that goes deeper than the weather. The Lord uses what He's got. You and me, we're imperfect agents, stumbling along. But you will be surprised that He uses you nonetheless. And I am convinced that there is a dinosaur. What was his name? Yeah, that guy. Him. I'm convinced there is him somewhere in your life. That in the unexpected twists and turns of life, that if you are faithful and available, you are to witness to that one who is waiting for you. Here is a dangerous prayer. Lord, bring me someone today who needs to witness the love and good news of Christ. In the busyness of life, I have to confess that I do not pray that enough. But when I do, and I have, something invariably happens. I mean, if we all did this week, imagine what the stories might be next Sunday. Now, I recently got back from a trip to the UK. I was surprised that so many people knew I was going away to the UK. I came here, hey, Graeme, how was your trip? I'm like, how do you know I was on a trip? And hey, Graeme, how was your trip? I'm like, how do you know I was on a trip? And then, of course, I heard online Mark Harris's sermon, and he talked a little bit about it. So thanks for your interest, and I thought that I would follow up because it's pertinent to what we're talking about this morning. See, I went to the UK for a 50th year anniversary celebrating my first year at college. It was a physical education teaching program. Now, this program was brilliant, and it taught, in very practical, hands-on way on how to teach children sport. And we chose to celebrate our first year because this program was closing down. We were the last class of this 3-year program, and it would be replaced by a much more theoretical degree, which I would have been terrible at. So we always called ourselves the last of the real jocks. And when I left college, when I graduated in 77, in June of 77, I rushed over to Canada. I visited Canada a month later because I was pursuing a certain young lady who came to college, and she was an exchange student for just 3 months. And at that time, I was not a believer. I was a happy-go-lucky Epicurean. I went to happy school. Diana was a believer. And for the first time when I came over here, I experienced Christian community in this church. It was then Fairview Bible Chapel. And I was realizing they had something that I didn't have. I was empty. I was treading water, and I came under conviction. I went back to the UK. I drove a van around London for 3 months for £1 an hour. I saved all my money. I bought a plane ticket to Canada and arrived November 1977 with no intention of going back. Within a few days of arriving, I made a decision to follow Jesus. I knelt down by a bed. I had an honest conversation with God. I realized that I needed to get right with Him, and I did. And before my visa rang out and the police came, 6 months later, I was married to this amazing girl and stayed. Now, we didn't have internet in those days. We didn't have Facebook. I wasn't really a letter writer. So I moved on from my college days and vanished. Now, after 47 years of not seeing or communicating with them bar one person, I was going back to them expecting, and they were expecting the happy-go-lucky Epicurean. 75 alumni were showing up, and this thought of sharing what has happened to me 75 times just seemed daunting and exhausting. Now, the organizers, they asked us, each one of us, to send ahead of time a 200-word bio of what we've been up to over the past 47 years. So I thought I would give them a taste of what has happened to me so that they know Higgsy has gone strange. And then I prayed for God's conversation, for a God conversation with those who wanted to dance. In my bio, I talked about having several road to Damascus experiences that reshaped my life. I talked about my identity was forged in the biblical narrative centered around divine love. I didn't give them the gospel. I gave them hints and tastes. And that Diana and I have had an adventure in various countries involving a number of small projects, small initiatives, involving helping the poor, business growth, job creation, as well as servant leadership mentoring. What will their reaction be? So they had this big meet and greet room. So we walked in, and when we saw them, we just hugged them. We just hugged them and loved them. And we laughed. We laughed and we reminisced. I was still fun. I know you don't believe that, but I was. I was still fun. And if there were barriers, they were knocked down as we showed genuine interest in their lives. My first God conversation was with a big ex-rugby player. And as we're doing a tour of campus. It's an amazing campus. It's mostly unrecognizable now after 50 years of development. And during a walk from one building to another, he asked me about my faith. Kind of a strange place to ask, but he asked. So I'm thinking, God conversation. I'm thinking, dance. So I told him that in the first century, the early church didn't talk about being Christian or were labeled Christian. They talked about being the way, a way to live that was centered in Jesus and lived out generosity, justice, and forgiveness. And I said that my journey has been attempted to live out the way. And I told him that the way is not a theory, but experiencing God in an amazing adventure. Now, as I say, it wasn't really the place to have a brief conversation, but it happened. And we were soon visiting another building, and that was basically it. And I've emailed him since to see if he wanted to dance. And he said, when I see you next time. And I thought, 47 years the first time. I don't think he wants to dance. Then at breakfast, I had a second conversation. It was with a graduate who traded in teaching for a military service. And he ended up with an amazing CV. He was a Navy commander, and he actually earned the OBE, the Order of the British Empire. Now, I didn't tell him that I was given the CKK, child of the King of Kings. He's retired. And now he's made 12 trips to the front lines of Ukraine delivering humanitarian aid. Very impressive. And he opened a door for me to talk about my little journey into other lands. And the Christian organization I volunteer for, called IBEX, that gives loans to Christian companies in difficult areas of the world. And I told him an impact story of a man who lives in a difficult place in the world, and this man realized there was no jam in the local stores. And so he decided, I'm going to make jam. And he Googled it, how to make jam. And he found it difficult to find fruit farms in his country, but he did find enough to start a business, and he was successful. And he got his product into the grocery stores, and he wanted to expand. And he had no means of raising capital, and he found out about IBEX, who provides these loans, and he applied. After an exhaustive investigation, he received a $400,000 US fund to build a factory and was provided with a retired executive from one of the largest food processors in the world from the USA, and she was a mentor to him. Now, he has 125 employees. There are far more fruit farms being developed, and he's committed to his employees. He's committed to his community. He's committed to the environment. And my friend was blown away by that kingdom story. And I left him praying that he wanted more. And we shall see. My third conversation was with someone who lived in my residence, in my dorm. I lived in residence for 3 years. And at that main dinner celebration, after the program finished, we were mingling. And we sat down with him. Diana and I were able to share some of our Damascus Road experiences. And he was moved by our story. And I asked him if he would take up the challenge to read the Gospel of John. And he said he would. In a subsequent email, he writes that we have intrigued him with our strong faith. And over the weekend, we also got close to 2 other alumni and their wives. And we have invited them to come next summer and visit us. And they both seem keen. All these years, I felt that I got a free pass in sharing my faith with past friends and associates. I don't know about you, but it just seems easier to tell strangers about Jesus than those who are close to me. And I would wonder, am I ashamed of the gospel of Christ? I had vanished and didn't have to find out until now. After this very special weekend, I have a burden for my alumni that I never had before. And I hope there will be more interactions to come. It's important to tell our stories to each other in the hope that it encourages you to be open and available for sharing your life with others. Pray dangerously. Dionysus is waiting. Pray dangerously.